Coming up on ParaTruth Reborn, we will talk to Aleks Petakov about his documentary Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, The Return to Area A.
Welcome to ParaTruth.
How's it going, ParaTruthers? Welcome to a brand new episode of ParaTruth Reborn. My name is Justin.
And I'm Eric.
And as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be talking to Aleks Petakov about his documentary, Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, The Return to Area A. Aleks, welcome to ParaTruth Reborn.
How's it going, guys? Thanks for having me on.
It's going really, really good.
We all had the matching gray shirt thing going on. It was not planned, I swear.
We were all psychically linked for this episode.
Yes. It would appear that way.
So, Aleks, for the listeners who may be discovering your work for the first time, what led you into investigating Bigfoot and producing documentaries about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess just always a kind of a curiosity for the unknown. I got into kind of cryptozoology stuff from a young age. I was interested in the Yeti. That led into Bigfoot and other mysterious topics as well, other creatures, Loch Ness. I was always interested in that. And then I've always been really big into the outdoors, hiking, backpacking all across North America at this point. But, especially when I was younger, mostly the Appalachian Mountains in the Northeast. Up here, I live in New Hampshire. I grew up in the state, and you have a lot of beautiful mountains, and I kind of gained an appreciation for that. Did some naturalism training back in the day and survivalism, and that really kind of sparked my interest further into just enjoying the outdoors and exploration and adventure. And then, kind of combining that with a passion for filmmaking and you're looking for Bigfoot in these kind of wooded wilderness areas. So that's kind of one thing led to another, and they're kind of like a trinity of factors, I suppose you could call it. The love for outdoors, the filmmaking, and the search for the unknown. I think they kind of go hand in hand. So that's what kind of led me down the path that I guess I'm on right now as we sit here talking about it.
Okay.
Right on. We've actually had talked with Small Town Monsters a couple of times. How did your partnership begin with them?
Yeah, I actually came in contact with Seth Breedlove, who founded Small Town Monsters almost 10 years ago now, I believe. I did a short documentary, which is very terrible because it's 10 years old at this point. And, it's come a long way, I'd like to say. I did a documentary about the Loch Ness Monster. And it was based off a trip I took to Loch Ness in Scotland, just a short 12-minute film. And I remember Seth actually had reached out to me and said, "Hey, I really liked your film. I'd love to show it at..." They were doing this Minerva Monster Day event in Ohio. And he was like, "I'd like to show it at our event." And I was like, "Oh boy, someone wants to screen this thing?" And I guess he really liked it. And we kind of struck up a friendship after that. And then he approached me a year or two later after that, asking if I'd be willing to do a series for Small Town Monsters called On the Trail of Champ, which was a documentary series looking at the Lake Champlain mystery in the Northeast in Vermont and New York, which has this kind of America's Loch Ness, as it's called, with the Lake Champlain Monster. And yeah, became friends with Seth from that point on. And we started working, collaborating every once in a while. And then I was working on a bunch of his films. I would do crew stuff, travel around with him, some of the On the Trail of Bigfoot type films, Momo, the Missouri Monster, just that sort of stuff. And then in 2021, we started a kind of YouTube specific series called Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, or just Beyond the Trail, which was an open-ended, just investigative documentary series following myself on some of my personal investigations into Sasquatch and related mysteries. Just sort of run and gun, guerrilla filmmaking style, very raw and just kind of getting out there, boots on the ground sort of thing. And we've been doing that now since 2021. Can't believe it's already been basically 5 years at this point. But through that period, been all across the United States and Canada, really all over North America in search of this mystery. So it's taken me from many, many states. I have 2 states left that I have not been to in the U.S. In general. So that's it's been quite a journey so far. So that's kind of how I got involved with small town monsters, and I've done a few other series over the years with small town monsters too. But that's kind of primarily what I've worked on in the duration.
Okay. Now, I mean, there's tons of documentaries out there, docu-series about Bigfoot. What makes the Bigfoot Beyond the Trail series different from the
Yeah, I think what makes it different is it's very, I don't want to use the word raw because it's obviously edited. It's not unedited, it's just not 10 hours of me standing in the woods. Like no one's going to watch that. Right.
right?
I think it's just, if you appreciate just an honest investigation, no sensationalism, I present it how it is, like whatever happens. We're not adding in any, oh my God, did you hear that? And then creepy music plays over it so you can't hear anything. Like none of that kind of stuff.
I hate those type of documentaries.
But yeah, that drives me up wall. And I understand why that's done, because a lot of these, like network shows, and they're being edited by people who aren't really interested in these topics. They're just editors, right? And that's
Right.
fact and whatnot. Whereas I actually have like a genuine interest in the subject matter. It's not just a job for me. It's not just, I'm editing a Bigfoot documentary, and then next week I'll be doing a documentary about, storage wars or whatever. It's not like, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'd say just what sets it apart is just it's very boots on the ground. It's, I go to a location. For example, I just got back from Oklahoma, and I'm doing a whole bunch of videos for my Beyond the Trail series of, we go to an area, I pick like a mountain range. I'm like, all right, I want to talk to local investigators, local witnesses. We go to the ground. We spend time in the woods. We go visit the local museums. We talk to people who are involved in the subject, try to get access to, specific cases, that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I'd say it's just, if you appreciate the kind of the non-sensationalized sort of stuff, I really strive to keep it, absolutely authentic at all times. And I would never want to compromise, what that is and what that entails.
Yeah, sure. But I think that's awesome, because like Justin said, that's the one thing that's so frustrating about the big network shows is they're like, oh, listen to what we just heard, but then they have music playing over it. It's like, what did we hear? And then of course, the one thing that always bothers me the most is, especially with like ghost documentaries, right? Paranormal investigations, is they want you to listen to an EVP, but before allowing you to decipher what it is on your own, they put the word up there. And it's like, your mind naturally makes that connection. It's like, well, you're just feeding us information and we don't know if it's even accurate. So it's nice to have something that's raw, that people can like feel as if they're there doing the investigation too, and are witnessing it in a way in real time as you are.
Yeah, I can understand the frustrations with that sort of approach, because you're priming the audience, right?
Mhm.
Another thing I really strive to do is just make sure to present information. And I always say, don't take my word for it. Make your own conclusion. You don't have to agree with anything I say. I try to keep my documentaries interesting and educational. So we focus a lot on, and this is something people have actually told me that have watched for years now. We get a lot of emails and messages, people saying, why they like the particular series is, I talk about like a specific mountain range or a specific area we're going to. And I really try to talk about some of the factors at play. What's the geology like there? What's the habitat like? Other species, focus on those interesting elements and explain why. And this is something actually I get quite a few times from people that live over in the UK. We have a lot of people from the United Kingdom that watch, and I get messages from them all the time where they're like, I never had any idea that Florida had wilderness areas like this, right? Or, oh my God, I didn't know New Jersey had millions of acres of forest land, and New York State has huge amounts of forest. Because we go to these places that people hear about New York or Florida, and they think, oh, New York's all city, it's all urban. Florida, it's just Miami and Orlando. They don't understand it, especially as they're not familiar with it, that these areas have these kind of habitats. And that's something that's been really cool for people that just aren't familiar with some of these spots. To kind of, like, I've had one person tell me they've learned more about the geography of the U.S. through watching my series than they ever knew of before. That's somebody who's traveled in the U.S., which is really cool. Again, someone else from the UK, but that's been really fun. And just kind of when we do get, alleged evidence, whether it's audio or anything like that, I always stress, like, especially if it's audio, I didn't see what made it, right? So I cannot say 100% what it is. And I always try to get people, outside parties, to examine my audio. I'll give an example now. I was on a trip in Texas, and I got some kind of weird audio. And one of my first things I do is I send that to people who I trust. I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? What is, what could this be? Because I'm not just going to I could easily just take that audio and slap it on screen and be like, could it be a Bigfoot? Right? If it's some other animal, I want to be able to determine that and talk about it. We've had hair samples in the past in some of my videos that we found, and we send them in for like a microscopic analysis, and they come back as, we've gotten lynx before, we've gotten raccoon, bear, that kind of stuff. So I always like to explain at the end, you'll see us collecting the mystery hair sample in the video, and then I actually send that to somebody that does microscopic analysis, and they come back to me with an answer, and then I actually can present like the screenshots from the microscope that they have and say, hey, this actually turned out to be a lynx. This is the importance of reaching out to people who have these specialized skills, whether they're in the scientific world or academic, that have these abilities that you might not. I mean, I'm not a scientist, right? I'm just a filmmaker and outdoor enthusiast. So I don't claim to be a scientist or anything like that, but I have no problem with reaching out to folks with those skill sets to try to get some of my evidence analyzed and looked at. And it would be so much easier to just say that all this mystery stuff we get is, it's very likely Bigfoot, right? I don't think that's not the truth, though. I want to present people with the absolute accuracy of what I'm experiencing, what I'm finding out there. So,
right. Sure.
Yeah.
Why do you think, like, for some of those other shows that are on network TV, why do you think it is that they tend to lead people on into believing that what they're finding is truly Bigfoot, even when they don't have significant evidence for it?
Well, I think, those networks are not interested in the truth. They are interested in selling ad revenue, right? Or advertising space. That's kind of how they operate. I know plenty of folks that have been involved in network television. I studied film and communication, so I know people that actually work in the industry too. And I also know people now that are paranormal cryptozoology researchers who do a lot of TV stuff. So they kind of firsthand experience. So I hear from both perspectives.
Sure.
And it's just a job for them, right? Like a lot of these people, like a production company does a series on Bigfoot, the crew involved, 9 times out of 10, they don't actually care about the subject matter. As soon as, hey, it's 9 p.m., our union hours dictate we can't work past this time, even though they could be in the woods and having activity going on, right? On the rare occasions, a giant crew with lights in the woods may be having stuff happen. As soon as their clock runs out for their union mandated time to go back to the hotel. Whereas, that's when, if it's something I'm experiencing, I'm going to be documenting it. But anyways, back to the networks, I just think they intentionally mislead people, most of them. Unfortunately, a lot of these programs are like that. I'm not trying to slight anyone personally or anything. I'm just saying, be careful what you believe. I mean, there's been, like those mockumentaries, right, about mermaids and other stuff that have come out over the years that are totally like misleading, but and it's almost like a kind of the Orson Welles thing from back in the day with the War of the Worlds, right? And reading it, and there was a disclaimer at the end, very, very quick one, but everyone's already freaking out, thinking, "Oh my God, this is real." Yeah, and I think again, most of these networks are not really interested in the truth. They're interested in selling ad space. That's kind of the motivating factor. So if they can keep people tuning in, yeah, and then obviously that model works. There's plenty of successful television shows and that sort of thing. But now there's this independent media space where people who are kind of sick of that are able to do it themselves. And I think we at Small Town Monsters have demonstrated that, because we're all very interested in the subject matter. We're not just, it's an assignment, right? Like we are actually interested. And this is, I put a lot of effort in personal blood, sweat, and tears kind of thing into my series. So, and I always tell people, make up your own mind. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to accept it. Like, do your own research. I would love to inspire people to get out there and do their own thing. And that's been really cool too, seeing over the years. I'll get people that'll message me. Like it's an area 6 miles into the mountains of Utah, and they'll send me a picture. Do you remember this location from your video? Like your video inspired me to come out here. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool, right?
Yeah.
Or people say a lot of times, like I have buddies that they have like a local business that has some Bigfoot stuff, or they'll have a museum like Cliff Barrickman in Oregon. He's got the Bigfoot Museum. My buddy Rob Rapp in Alaska has a Bigfoot art gallery, which is like a framing and matting business he does, but he's got like a Bigfoot art gallery section. He tells me almost weekly, he's like, man, somebody came in and said they heard about this place from one of your videos, because we featured him quite a bit in there. And that's really cool too, that people get inspired to go support other, local and small businesses in that way, based off of just like a common passion. So that kind of it is, that part of it, I should say, is really rewarding and really cool. So that's been, I think that's not to get on a high horse or anything, but that's the difference kind of between like the indie stuff and what you maybe see on the TV, the really popular programs, for sure.
No, that's why we love small town monsters. Not to mention, it's in our home state of Ohio too. So, I think it's great that you guys are doing this work. And I've loved the documentaries that I've seen so far from you guys. So I'm glad that you're continuing on, especially after the harsh things of 2020 and everything leading up to today. So congratulations for you guys keeping it up.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a strange decade so far, but a lot of times too, I'll get people that'll tell me, watching when my videos come out, or any of the Small Town Monsters videos, because we have videos that come out on YouTube, and we also have films that we run through an annual Kickstarter every year that come out on like different platforms as well, or Kickstarter backers get the films. They'll say, these are like the highlights. This is kind of like my distraction from all the craziness and just, life stuff in general. So that's really cool too, to know that people, they kind of really live vicariously through some of the adventures, and they enjoy it in that way too, in like a meaningful way, not just in like an arbitrary, I'm just watching this in the background kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. So what exactly is Area A, and why has it become such a focal point for Bigfoot research?
Yeah, Area A is one of those places that's just, I think about it almost daily. So I'll kind of give a little quick backstory. Area A is sort of code name given to a location up in Alaska on the Kenai Peninsula, which is this large peninsula in kind of South Alaska, south of Anchorage, and the kind of the populated area. It's about the size of the state of Maine, give or take, the peninsula itself. And it has so many different habitats and interesting areas. They kind of call it like mini Alaska, or Alaska's playground. A lot of people go there and kind of do all kinds of recreation, outdoor stuff. It has very interesting habitats all across, like I said. But what most interesting is the coastal rainforest found along the mountains there in the coastal areas, and it goes hundreds, thousands of miles. I don't know. I mean, it's all these giant bays that jut in, and there's just mountains that rise out of the sea, and you have these temperate rainforests that are akin to what you find in British Columbia, Washington State, and all the way to the redwoods in Northern California. It's part of that kind of Pacific coastal temperate rainforest chain. So for many years, areas like that have conjured up stories of what they call the hairy man up there, but with these Sasquatch-like beings, mysterious occurrences all up and down the Kenai Peninsula. You've got the famous incident Port Chatham, Portlock, which is the very tip of the Kenai Peninsula. A lot of debate about what happened there, but that is obviously one of these kind of famous incidents. But Area A is just, again, it's a code name for one specific area. A friend of mine, he had built a remote property out there, basically just had built a cabin to go hunt and fish at. And it's over an hour to get there by boat in a very remote area. So just getting there is difficult in itself. And he'd built a cabin out there and basically started having strange things happen from getting to the location after buying the initial property and then building a cabin. They had kind of the typical stuff you hear with a lot of the Sasquatch reports. You had, they would witness rocks being thrown at them. They would see rock, like one of the stories was a horizontal or a rock flying out of the woods horizontally. They'd hear knocks, whistles, strange roaring type sounds, rocks kind of landing near them. And then subsequently, as they built this cabin, they'd bring other people out to help work on the cabin, and everyone kind of experienced little things. And eventually the place was kind of named Area A. There was a group known as the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. They got involved. I believe they're the ones that named it Area A, but it kind of stuck. People thought, oh, Area Alaska, Area Ape. There was different kind of ideas of why they should call it that, and that kind of just stuck. So I'm not the one that originated the name, but I've certainly continued to use it because it just sounds cool.
Right.
Everyone loves a good company name. Like the North American Wood Ape guys, they have an area in southeast Oklahoma called Area X. And that obviously has very kind of connotations to it, Area X, even though I think it was just because they had an X, Y, and a Z for the research areas, and X happened to be the one that was the most productive. It sounds like X-Files, but I was recently near there too, down in that area. But anyway, back to Area A, I've been now 3 times and have had some interesting things happen there, and have just heard the stories from a variety of people that have gone over the years and friends of mine. And, my friend who's the property owner has had a lot of strange stuff happen.
Okay. Well, like of all the places around the U.S. we've been, what made you decide that it was actually worth returning back to Area A for the documentary?
Well, it was just the first trip out. We took a trip out there in 2022, and I had known the property owner for about a year up until then. And we'd communicated about some of the stuff that he had happened. And it just so happened, able to line up to go in 2022. That's when I ended up going. And we went out that first week, and we had quite a few interesting things happen. And of course, I thought, man, I want to come back out here. A lot of times you go to these places and nothing happens, right? It's very quiet. But out here, our first week, we had a bunch of interesting things happen. Now, I can't say any of it was definitively Sasquatch. It all kind of fits the purported behavior, if we want to call it that. But, we had like an instance where we were up sitting around this fire pit that's up on this kind of like ledge area in the woods up from this cabin. And, it's about 3-4 in the morning. It's in May. So it's that time of year where it's starting to get between extreme darkness and then extreme light. So it never really got fully dark. It would kind of be like this dusk. It would get dark there in the trees because you're in these really thick undergrowth with, all kinds of devil's club and different temperate rainforest plants there. And we're just sitting there making jokes, sitting there for hours doing a fire. And we start hearing these kind of wood knock sounds, and that kind of catches our attention. And then we start hearing what sounds like rocks being thrown into the water, but it would kind of hit debris along the way and then smack against the rock shore and then kerplunk into the water. So it wasn't like it was just a water splash, because that could be a seal or something else kind of having fun in the water. It was like it was like a series of events, and this happened for a little bit, and there were these wood knocks interspersed. And the theory is that these creatures maybe do some kind of wood knocking type sound. Is it communicative thing? There's a lot of different theories. There's quite a few Class A Sasquatch sightings where people either hear wood knocking or rock clacking before the sighting or after the sighting, during the sighting. There's I've documented at least like 26 reports that involve that, so where there's many encounters where people allege where they just hear wood knock kind of things. I've heard that too, but unless you actually see it, you can't be 100% certain what was producing it. So that's why I say even what we encountered, I don't know what it was, but that was very interesting because it's just, you're just sitting there in the dark, and then all of a sudden this just happens for a few minutes and it just dies down. And we're scanning with thermal units, looking around. We don't see anything, but of course it's very tricky terrain. There's a bit of a hill above us. So we thought, okay, man, what are the chances that something was rolling down the hill, and maybe it was a rock rolled down the hill? But the problem is that entire habitat is covered with this spongy layer of moss. You can literally lay in the moss. I mean, I've done it. I've taken naps just without anything, just lay back in the moss, and it kind of like absorbs your body weight. And and the only rocks you have are down by the shore, by the ocean. Right? And we're kind of up a little bit, maybe 40, 50 feet from that shore. And then there's a ridge above us, and there's not any rocks or anything. You have to really dig under the moss to even find any rocks. The only ones in large piles are down by the shore. So we try, okay, let's take one of the fire pit rocks and try to like throw it or roll it down the hill and see. And we did a couple of times, did some experiments. We throw the rock and it just kind of rolls down silently, and it just gets snagged on anything, and there's no obvious sound. Like, the only thing we really got to match it was like trying to overhand throw it and get it to hit the rock shore before it then smashed into the water and makes that kind of kerplunk sound.
Yeah.
Now, on overnight audio, we had that happen on quite a few occasions, but that was a kind of an interesting incident that first trip. And then the night after that, we camped on the ridge where that happened, or we thought maybe the sounds were coming from, because it sounded like it was a little to our right, and that's kind of hugs the water, and then you've got this ridge. So we thought, all right, let's camp on that ridge. And that night was like the only night it rained during that first week out there. We were getting a little bit of a like pitter patter of rain, and then it would subside. It was not like torrential. It was just a sprinkling, and then it would stop. But that night, a couple of us, there was 3 of us actually there. I was in a tent with another guy, and there was another guy right more across from us. We were hearing, it sounded like something moving around and stomping, and you hear these knocks, and you hear that same kind of lock sound. And I would kind of try to position myself to get my formal out to be able to peek over to see if there's anything going on. But where we had our tent set up, it was like there's this moss kind of embankment right above me, so I couldn't really review as much. And this went on for a bit, but there'd be also rain in between. So you'd be kind of drifting off back to sleep. Nothing's happened for a little bit. And you hear another kind of the knock in the distance. And then the rain starts and you can't hear anything. And that happened. And then the next night after that, we camped on that same ridge. Didn't hear anything about stories. All we heard were sea lions swimming in the bay. There's a lot of sea lions out there, and they can make the kind of crazy sounds. They'll hear one do this horrible noise, and then 5 respond in the other bay. And like, that we hadn't heard that at all the night before that or any other nights. It's freaking when you first hear it, but once you kind of feel like where it is, it makes sense. But no other mysterious sounds that second night. And he found this kind of weird looking handprint pressed up against the side of the metal fabbin, which is an unusual place for it to be. It looked a little bit large, and it definitely had dermal ridges, kind of what primates and humans have.
Sure.
It wasn't a moose or a bear, in my opinion. It was either a human or something human-like. So we had somebody with on the police skills, be able to collect samples from that, and sent it off for testing with a project called Legend Meets Science 2, and we're still awaiting any kind of results on that. It's been 4 years now, so I don't know. I don't know the status on that, but now a lot kind of happened that first week that we thought was interesting enough that I'll definitely want to return again. So I went back the next year after that, which was 2023, with the intention of staying for 2 weeks. So 2 weeks in a row, and pretty much heard nothing. It was completely, totally different trip. Also rained most of the time. We had very heavy rain that entire trip. We found some kind of interesting open footprints and did some 3D scans of those with those 3D apps on the phones. Really had not much happen in the regard of mysterious things, because I don't know if it was because of rain or not, but it just goes to show you can go to a location, and it's not like every time we go somewhere there's something that happens. Right. 2 weeks, like that was a long time out there, and we barely heard anything. We tried our best to explore some of the areas and really get out there, but nothing really unusual to report from that second stuff. And then my third trip of this past summer in 2025, went out there for a week again. First day, we heard some strange kind of rock sound, and then the rest of the trip was pretty quiet again, and it rained a lot. And it's a rainforest in Alaska, right? So weather usually doesn't cooperate, but being in contact with the property owner, they can't get out there year round as well. It's really only from the spring to the fall. For the winter months, the water usually pretty rough. It's a little milder in that part of the Alaskan coast than it would be, say, inland, where they get that really kind of deep cold. It stays a little bit more mild and less snow in these coastal areas. So, but the weather, in terms of waves, can be really rough. So it's very tough to get out there. But, just being in touch with the property owner, every time he has something interesting happen, he would let me know, like, hey, we heard another one of those mystery gunshot sounds, or, we saw something kind of like duck down and run off really quick. Like, there's been a couple possible sightings of strange stuff there. But yeah, it's just kind of a whole host of stuff. I mean, that's kind of the summation, I suppose, of why we find it interesting out there. A lot of the stuff that's reported that's happened is kind of documented taking place elsewhere with alleged Sasquatch kind of activity over the years. So it just seemed like, for whatever reason, there was this, they weren't a fan of the cabin. I don't know. I'm assuming, kind of when it was first built, there was a bunch of stuff that happened in subsequent years, but then there'll be one summer where very little happens. And then next summer, it'll kind of start up again. There doesn't really seem to be any rhyme or reason to kind of the pattern that goes on out there. I mean, some of the more recent stuff from the past 2 summers were because he was building a couple more smaller cabins out there, and that seemed to reignite a little bit of the activity. I don't know if, that has obviously some kind of correlation, which I might theorize it does, but I can't be certain, of course.
That'd be very interesting, considering like when you think of paranormal investigations and paranormal or hauntings in general, like how often we tend to come across people who've found paranormal activity ignite because of renovations being done in a house or add-ons and things like that. So the thought of like possibly, him building more cabins, igniting more activity would be really intriguing in that sense, especially when there are people out there who think that Bigfoot isn't necessarily even a physical being anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, of course, right? There's different theories about what could be going on. People think, does it even exist, right? There's a lot of there's a lot of speculation. I mean, if we're going to approach it from kind of, let's say hypothetically it is some sort of relic hominid kind of flesh and blood creature, maybe you're encroaching on its terrain, so it has to show some kind of aggressive display. Some of the first things they had happen out there were, these rocks being thrown. We interviewed one guy who is like a kind of like a contractor that the property owner brought out there, and the idea was, oh, you come out with me for the weekend, help me work on the cabin, you get a fishing trip and a camping trip and like a beautiful Alaska wilderness trip out of it, right? Who wouldn't do that? Just do a little bit of your work. And one of the guys, I think he was an electrician, he was doing some work, and we actually interviewed him in the first Alaskan coastal Sasquatch documentary, which came out in 2022. He talked about, they're all sitting there kind of hanging out at the fire, and then like rocks just come kind of flying, like small pebble kind of things come flying and land near them. And they're like, I mean, where is this coming from kind of thing? They would find, I'm going to see if I can get off my desk here without knocking everything over. They would find these strange netted rocks actually in their boat. So they would, before they built the cabin, they would moor the boat out in the bay because of, or not wanting to sleep just intense exposed with brown bears, very dangerous on the shore. So they would put their boat out in the bay. They would then come in on a dinghy, little Zodiac type thing, raft, come out, do work, clear the land, and then go back and spend the night in the cabin, or not in the cabin, in the boat, excuse me. There were a couple occasions where I guess they found where they were on the shore and they thought they heard the door of the boat slamming by itself. So they're like, oh, that's kind of strange. And upon returning to harbor later, hosing off the boat, they would find one of these stones inside the boat, a couple hundred yards out from shore. And then they would find this in there, like, who put that in there? And these are rocks that are actually found all over the place on the shore there. This is one that I dug out from, they're buried in the moss. What it is these were used by fishermen back in the day. It's just a little stone in a plastic net. And you'll find piles of them all along the beach. I mean, they're actually buried. They've been there for so long, they're actually buried under the moss. We've had to dig some of them out. Even this summer, we bring them along as souvenirs. I brought a whole bunch of them. I give them to friends. It's kind of like a Alaskan squash rock or something, as we kind of call them. It's sort of funny, but these were just because they didn't want to use lead or metal. Stones were cheap. They're all over the place. Take one of those and use them for their fishing nets to kind of weigh them down. At least that's what we think. And you'll find them all along coastal Alaska. And maybe there was an old community there as well. That's one of the ideas. Maybe just randomly fishermen pulling up and saying, yeah, this is where I'm going to build some of these rocks. And they left a pile there and it's now buried under the moss. And then these are the kind of rocks that they used to find in their boat that they believe were actually thrown in there. So that's why I have that as kind of a souvenir. But yeah, again, just kind of some of the reported behavior, hearing these knocks, these mystery gunshot sounding noises, whistles, whoops, vocalizations. One of the strangest ones was this baby crying sound, which I've heard before with with alleged Bigfoot cases. I've heard it for other paranormal things too, but I don't really investigate a lot of that myself. So what's really interesting is there's been a couple occasions where this baby crying sound has been heard. One of the first ones was there was women present on the property, and I believe it was one of the first years, and the property owner kept a journal of strange events, and he made a note, women had he brought out there, said, hey, we heard this baby crying sound, and they had never really heard that before, and he made a note of it. And then I guess on another occasion, I think it was a year or two after that, women there that were brought, wives and friends, that kind of thing, were blueberry picking independently, and they both heard some kind of baby crying sound. Eventually kind of reported to each other and then told the property owner, and he said, well, I have an audio recorder out there. If you guys reported it, we have it on audio. And they have this audio clip of this baby crying sound, which is very weird. I don't know what it is. I mean, I've heard all kinds of theories. Oh, it's a fox, it's a porcupine, it's one of these, because animals can make strange noises, right? That you can't discount that. But of all the times they've been out there, it's mostly men, because it's guys going fishing and, kind of getting away from responsibilities in their lives, just sort of going out for the weekend, having fun. And they've really never heard that kind of sound. It's only happened on the few occasions women have been taken out there. And the Alaskan natives, the Tlinkits, they have folklore of what's called the Kushtaka, or the land otter man. And that sounds the imagery there sounds very weird, but it's described, from what I understand, what I've been told, as this hairy man-like creature that's seen swimming between islands and bays and that sort of thing. And if you know anything about coastal parts of Alaska and British Columbia, and I've heard this from folks in these areas, they'll be out in the middle of nowhere going between the mainland and an island chain. And there's a lot of these islands all over the place, Southeast Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, all these areas, British Columbia, and they'll come across elk swimming between mountain lions, black bears. They'll be swimming from the mainland to these islands, sometimes miles apart. Really kind of surprising. And there are stories supposedly that Sasquatches have been seen doing the same thing, swimming between islands and different areas. And so that's where I guess this lore of this Kushtaka thing comes from, the land otter man, because it's a hairy man-like creature that's seen swimming, but it also produces a sound of a baby crying to lure women in. So is the lore, right? So I don't know, kind of a very intriguing sort of precedent. We try to disprove that by, we had a female researcher with us on one of the trips, on the second trip out there. And again, that was the trip where we didn't really hear much at all. And we had her singing and all kinds of stuff just to see, hey, is there anything this might conjure? Because 4 guys sitting in the woods with guns, that's probably going to put off a very different vibe than, a woman singing or doing something, just the sound of voice, pheromones, all kinds of stuff. So we tried it, and we never really experienced anything of note with that. But again, that baby crying sound has really only been heard on a couple occasions when women were there. And I just think statistically it's a little weird. You would imagine if it's just some random animal that you'd at least hear it another occasion of all the times those guys go out there. But it's not the case. So that's probably one of the more intriguing and bizarre parts of of the whole Area A kind of story. Now, I gotta say, of course, as I always say, we don't have proof of what's doing this or whether it is Sasquatch or not. This is obviously all just kind of theorizing and, basing it off of previous profiles of behavior. But whatever's going on, there's something mysterious. I don't know what it is or if it's some physical entity or something, but something unusual is happening. And what's really interesting is, a lot of these really credible reports, in my opinion, of Sasquatch encounters, some of the ones that come to mind, my top 10, none of these people really looking for it. It's just they happen to be in rural or wilderness areas, whether they were working as a park ranger or just camping, hiking, hunting, that sort of thing, fishing, and they had an encounter. They weren't actually seeking it. There's been people who have claimed to have had encounters while looking for Bigfoot, sure. But I'm talking about just the kind of the most interesting eyewitnesses to me are the ones that were just, I don't know if it's right place, right time, or whatever the case may be. and this is certainly the case with Area A. I know the property owner very well. He just wanted to build a cabin and have fun and, have a place to kind of spend time with friends and family. And all this stuff started happening. Like, he never wanted any of this stuff, and he really doesn't like a lot of attention from it as well. So he's been gracious enough over the years to allow us access to go out there and research and do our filming and see what's going on. But this is not something like he's trying to turn this into some kind of a thing. It's just, it is what it is, right?
Right. Now, there's been huge debate over whether Bigfoot is biological or something more mysterious altogether. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I never fully commit. I mean, I am definitely, I would say, more on the kind of relict hominid, which I guess would be sort of flesh and blood. I mean, I don't know. I think because there is allegedly, there's all these alleged footprints and hair samples and rocks being thrown, that sort of stuff. That's like a physical manifestation of some kind of phenomena. So that's what I lean towards. And if you look at, there's a precedent for hominids existing. Like, we are an upright, somewhat hairy, some of us more than others, a species of upright hominids, right? Like, that is a established fact given by us. Whereas, you have other non-bipedal primates, chimps, gorillas, orangutans, that sort of thing. A lot of lesser primates too. So there's a precedent for that sort of thing. I don't know. A lot of people talk about some of the more paranormal aspects of alleged Bigfoot sightings. I don't know. I don't really look into that a whole lot because majority of the sightings, in my opinion, are pretty mundane. Like, a very common type of sighting is people saw it cross the road. Like, oh, I saw something cross the road. There's nothing inherently paranormal, I guess, about that in terms of just what they're witnessing. Like, there's no other weirder details. I think a lot of the paranormal details nowadays stick out because in a world where we're inundated with podcasts and tons of shows about these sorts of things, everyone's looking for the next crazy big story. And if you've just got 10 witnesses that just say, yeah, across the road, or we saw it near our camp, in itself, that may not be a very interesting sighting, as opposed to somebody claiming there was UFOs involved and all this other kind of stuff that's unverifiable just sort of happening, going on. That makes for a more compelling and interesting story. So I think that's why a lot of those stories get more prominence than maybe like the mundane stories that just kind of fit the data set. But I don't know. I can't say 100%. There's really no experts. I'm certainly not an expert. I really just try to go off of my experiences and the people I've talked to and come to trust. And I don't know. The debate will probably rage until, there is some sort of physical specimen or there's some other way to substantiate it. I really don't know. I really try to stick to my experiences and my investigations. And, in Area A, there haven't really been any other strange things reported from what I understand. People haven't seen orbs or any other weird lights that sometimes gets associated with other areas that have a history of activity. Right. And it's all been pretty standard, like rocks being thrown. And we heard some knocks. We heard a tree crash, and then we looked up in that area and we possibly saw something duck, and like that sort of stuff. It's, and that's true to what I've experienced out there too. It's very, that is, I don't know if it seems physical or it just sounds that way. That's kind of my interpretation, at least.
Okay. But no, we're in this age of what we consider modern technology.
Yeah.
And despite that modern technology, we've yet to see any definitive proof over years, decades of searching for this elusive creature. Two questions there, I guess. First, why do you think people still hold on to the belief that it does exist despite not having any definitive proof? And also, do you think with modern technology, we are actually getting closer to finding that definitive proof?
Yeah, it's a good question, one that comes up a lot. And I mean, the long and short of it is I don't really know, but I can give my kind of theories about possibly why. I think overall, there still are, even in this day and age with all this technology we have, there's still so much wilderness and space out there in North America. I've been to quite a few of these places, and it's frightening how much territory there is. I mean, driving from into parts of Canada up to Alaska on the Alaska Highway, there's areas that you could just hike off a couple miles off the road and never be seen again with the amount of space that's out there. And I think that's one factor. The other factor is there really isn't that many people that are truly in a kind of scientific or very rigorous fashion looking for evidence of Sasquatch. I mean, there's not very many biologists or scientists. There's a handful of groups that approach it very seriously. There's a lot of weekend warriors and enthusiasts. So people that, oh, we're going to go look for Bigfoot in this national forest this weekend, and they spend a couple nights out there, that sort of thing. So if you look at how much space there is and how many people are actually looking and examining these areas, it's very minuscule. And then if you judge how people are doing things, amongst that, there's very few people doing it in a very kind of meticulous and scientific way, like that you would need for data. Like, okay, we observed this night, we had a rock thrown here, and they have full detailed notes of it. It's usually just like, oh, we had something happen. And, there's really no paper trail or way to verify or not necessarily paper trail, but like verification documentation sort of thing of what took place. So I don't think there's truly a lot of people. I think there's a lot of enthusiasts and a lot of people who go out there. And then, of course, you got to worry about confirmation bias, and not every twig snap you hear in the woods is a Bigfoot sort of thing. I think a lot of times that happens, and you got a big group of people together and they're primed. They want this activity to happen. So any sound they hear, oh my God, you have to really strive and be very critical and skeptical of everything you're experiencing, and try to explain it away before you jump to the conclusion that, oh, it definitely had to be a Sasquatch, right? Like that should be the last thing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with some of the more credible stories, it seems like a lot of those encounters are not necessarily people who are looking. They're just out in the woods, out in the wilderness, doing all sorts of things, like mundane sort of things. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Just whether that's coincidental. If these things are as intelligent as they are, they probably know if people are going in the woods and banging on trees and making these whoop sounds, they're probably going to figure out, yeah, they might be mimicking us. So I don't think we should go towards them. Whereas if someone's out chainsawing a piece of forest that has been untouched for decades on your turf, and you might go check it out. Like, hey, let me throw some rocks at this guy, get him out of here. That's just me, I'm kind of making an assumption, but I would assume. But that kind of pattern has been reported over the years. And I don't know. I think the debate is going to rage until, there's more evidence. There's a lot of alleged evidence. So footprints, hair samples, pieces of video. But the problem is a lot of that evidence is subjective. It's not proof, right? Like you have evidence and proof proving something. You can have evidence, all kinds of things, but even in like a legal trial, think about how much evidence they gather and how long it takes them to make the case to definitively prove, hey, this guy did this. They can have all sorts of great evidence, but on its individual merits, it may not be worth much, as opposed to like the larger case. I'm certainly not a legal scholar. That's just kind of my interpretation. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the bottom line is there is something going on, in my opinion. I've experienced enough and talked to enough people that there's some mystery phenomena going on out there. And I don't know if we're any closer or any further. Certainly there's a lot of modern tech, but even now it's so hard to get a really good picture of, wildlife that runs in front of your car. I've had a giant moose run in front of me, and by the time I have my phone out, it's already gone in the bush, and it has, it's 6 feet wide with its antlers. It's like, where did it go?
Right.
I mean, so I don't know. It's there's again, I don't think there's enough people seriously looking in a very meticulous fashion. And in a place like Alaska, there's basically nobody looking. Weekend warrior, but there's not a scientific team in a place like Area A that's there 6 months out of the year doing rotations and have thermal cameras everywhere, right? Like that is just not happening anywhere. And most of the stories are coming from people just randomly in these environments. And then you've got the weekend warrior kind of stuff all over the place. And I'm a lot of enthusiasts, but you have to sift through some of that to kind of see if it's valid or not. So, that doesn't really paint a really good picture, because it's like there's nobody really truly kind of engaged in this kind of search in a way that we would need. And it's difficult. Like, people have their own lives. Like, I wish I could spend a year on location in a place like that and just try to learn as much as I could, but that's so logistically tough to do. Right.
Right.
So I don't know. I'd like to say we are hopefully closer, but I don't know at this point. I'm just kind of, speaking from my personal experiences, just happy to be out in some of these environments and see if there's anything viable or if anything happens, sort of thing.
Yeah. And I remember when I was like speaking on just the elusivity of animals in general. When I was about 8 years old, I was riding my big wheel at the time through the metro parks with my parents. And here in Cleveland, much of the metro parks line the Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Yeah.
And I was ahead of them quite a bit. And I remember like looking off to the left. And at the time, like all I saw was a glimpse, and it looked like a giant bear on its hind legs, like rubbing up or scratched up against a tree. And like I immediately I'm scared to death. So I turn around and speed back, right? And maybe no more than 2 minutes between when I turned around and went back to my parents and ended up right back where we were, that thing was completely gone. There was nothing, no trace, no idea what it really was. Like in my mind, it was a bear. And like thinking back now, I was like, was it? Could it have been Bigfoot? Could it have been something else? But it's crazy to think of like how large many animals within the forest are and how quickly they do disappear. It's their superpower, really. And so with Bigfoot, it's very much the same way. It's like how he just pops up in many places seemingly and then just vanishes. And a lot of people, I think nowadays, are tracing that to like, oh, it must not be a physical being. It must be spiritual. It must be ethereal or something like that. But it's like, no, when you look at the history of just animals in general and those that are wild animals, they are fully capable and fully tuned to disappear on whim. That's kind of like what they do and it's how they survive. So I agree. I think it's very possible it's still a physical being, and the fact that we're not seeing it has nothing to do with the technology. It's just that animals and instincts tend to work better and more efficiently than where technology can, and it's just is how it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like you mentioned with wildlife, it's incredible. I've been in the woods and had no idea a moose was very close to me until it started moving. I sat for a little bit and just listened and realized, oh my God, there's been a moose there the whole time. And we're talking about an animal that can be almost 1,000 pounds. And, if it doesn't want to be stealthy, it doesn't want to be stealthy. I've had moose run past my tent in northern Maine at 6 a.m. and it's like a stampede running past your tent. And then other times you won't even hear it moving.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible, right? I mean, here in northern New England, we've got, God, I mean, I think the numbers are between 50 to 70,000 moose. I know the numbers kind of ebb and flow, but they're the most amount of moose anywhere in the United States outside of Alaska, which obviously has many. I mean, they're everywhere. You see them all over the place, even in suburban Anchorage. That's how close the wilds are to nature, to cities and civilization in a place like Alaska. About here, I live in the woods and we have moose around here regularly, and I've never even seen one on my property. I've gotten it on trail camera a few times. That's it. Like I've never seen one out here. I've seen plenty of moose in other areas and run into them over the years, but knowing that there's that number of moose around you and most of the time you go out, you never see one at all. It's very intriguing. Kind of, like, where are they? They're somewhere out hunkered down. And let's say there's only 20 Sasquatch in like one large area of northern Maine. That's nothing, compared to the fact there's thousands upon thousands of more moose and there's 30,000 black bears. So biologically speaking, the habitat there is rich enough to support humongous large mammals that weigh thousands of pounds and, consume many calories daily, and also are active year round in the case of moose and deer and that sort of thing. Obviously bear hibernate for most of the winter, but there is a precedent for large animals surviving on the environment. But again, to go back to the debate, I mean, I don't know what exactly these things are, what they are. Obviously people still wonder, oh, they probably don't even exist. I don't know what is going on. Like something is going on. People are having some encounters with something. Not every single person is lying. I've too many people that I trust that really, I don't know why they would make up a story like this. And then the other interesting factor is a lot of on my travels, I've run into people who, and over the years of researching, people who have had an encounter, but they don't want to tell it publicly. They don't want to be on a podcast. They don't want any attention, but they have this story. And a lot of times they have PTSD. I mean, I've got a friend who claims to have had a sighting of a creature while driving and looked at it. And whenever we go out camping with him, he has like, he's scared. He doesn't want to stay out at night. He gets these kind of very uneasy feelings, like, I don't want to say trauma. Yeah, I guess trauma would be some like a PTSD kind of thing. And it's like if there's something real causing that. I don't think it's all just kind of in his head. And that's something with other witnesses too that have had, you know, scarier kind of encounters where they felt like their life was threatened. Yeah, I've heard this from hunters, people that I have interviewed over the years. One gentleman in particular who talked about, you know, he was an avid turkey hunter and he had, you know, kind of a face-to-face with these things. And, you know, he didn't want to hunt for years after that. He could not get himself to go back into the woods. And that was like his number one thing that he liked to do.
Yeah.
I've heard that story time and time again. So it's people like that that don't want any attention. And a lot of times, especially here in New England, some of the stories like in New Hampshire that I've taken over the years, like it's almost like pulling teeth to get the person to trust you. And they finally let their guard down to tell you their story. But they're like, you're not going to put this out anywhere. Like, I don't want this, you know, my job's too important. I don't want to be a crazy Bigfoot person. I think that attitude is changing a little bit now because of the prevalence of a lot of the shows and the podcasts, and it's like more culturally ubiquitous. But I don't know. It's some of these people, man. Like I've talked to people who are very educated. We're talking PhDs to former Secret Service members, all sorts of educated folks to folks that are not educated but know the woods but like the back of their hand. Every kind of spectrum, law enforcement, military, all sorts of backgrounds that all have consistent reports and stories. And many of them either don't want to share publicly or, you know, will only under very specific circumstances kind of share their story with you. So it's perplexing when you kind of think about it. I don't think every single one of them is lying or misinterpreting or misidentifying. Like, yes, there may be a portion of that, certainly. You know, there's a lot of people that do make stories up and, oh, if it gets me on a podcast or, oh, I can make some money off this. But there's red flags. And then there's the guy that, you know, he's leasing a hunting cabin in the woods and, you know, so all this stuff happened over the course of a decade and never would have known his story had he not told somebody who was interested in that kind of stuff. So I don't know.
You know, and I think it's like for those who are like, seem to be deathly afraid, you know, like your friends who are too afraid to be outside. They don't want to be out at dark. You know, even if they didn't see, let me put it this way. If they thought they saw something, but they were unsure, they wouldn't be so afraid. But humans have a natural instinct, a primal instinct, where it's like, even if you don't connect the dots, there's a familiarity and a fear that clicks in. And so even if you're unsure of what you saw, the fear is there because you know what you saw.
Right.
Even if you can't quite point it out.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said about the people that they claim to have had a sighting and they have some sort of traumatic response to being in the location where it happened or being out after dark, that sort of thing. I mean, I've witnessed that firsthand and I don't know. It's a little perplexing. I'm not a psychologist. I don't, sociologist, anything like that. I don't know how to diagnose that stuff professionally, but when you get to know somebody and, you know, they're all fun and jolly. And then when it gets dark, you know, they're like a nervous Nelly and it's like they're a different person at that point, right? It's just kind of unusual. It's something that I kind of grapple with a lot, trying to rationalize and understand. And you're like, what's the motivation behind a story like that?
Right.
And some of the people I'm thinking of, just people that I've become friends with now, and I know, like, they're not trying to make $1 million on these stories. They're not trying to get on every podcast and TV show and all that kind of stuff. A lot of them that have become researchers now is because they had an experience and they have this kind of desire to want to know what it was. They want to know more. I've got a friend of mine that he had this kind of weird tent encounter where he saw this strange hand and a brushing up against his tent up in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And, you know, he's thinking, oh my God, is this person messing with me? And then he heard this kind of guttural vocalization, weird vocal that went through his chest and vibrated like it just vibrated through the chest. Very loud, and it freaked him out. And he didn't know what it was. He never thought Bigfoot for years until he saw a documentary featuring a a biologist named John Mayenzinski talking about an encounter, similar encounter he had in the tent where, something was kind of messing with his camp while he was up in a remote area in Wyoming in the mountains surveying sheep, I believe, as a biologist, and had this kind of series of Sasquatch encounters. And my friend saw that show many years after his encounter. It's like, is that what I experienced? Because he did, and then you hear that a lot actually. And two of some of my top witnesses in my kind of book, my mental book of encounters, they talk about hearing a vocalization, they feel the vocalization. Now, whether or not that's because it's like immense power, or some people talk about frequencies, animals can produce these infrasonic or low frequencies. A friend of mine had an encounter with an alligator in I believe East Texas or Louisiana. He said I was 12, 15 feet away from it, and it did this low grumbling sound, and I got this instant wave of fear that came over me. Intimidating predator. I don't know, why our body's responding like that, but you hear that with these Sasquatch encounters too. Again, my friend, he saw that hand brushing up against his tent as he's in the tent with his son, young son and mother of the son at the time, and he's thinking fight or flight, like, oh, this is some guy, I gotta go mess with him. And then he hears this sound that kind of freaks him out. And based off of that encounter, that kind of led him into wanting to find out more. And he's like, I want to see one of these things, I don't know if that's what I encountered, but that's what he wants to find out more. And so that's really interesting, the folks that get into the research or the investigation side of things because they had a defining encounter or an experience. Yeah. So there's certainly a lot to ponder.
Yeah. Well, we could probably talk to you for the rest of the night, but it is time to let you go. So I wanted to give you a chance to tell everybody where they can find you, find your work. The mic's all yours.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, most of my work is found on Small Town Monsters. So we are an independent production company, as I was talking about earlier. We do a lot of different documentaries, Bigfoot, UFOs, cryptids, other sort of strange topics as well. My series is called Beyond the Trail. You can find a lot of the stuff I've specifically talked about tonight linked on my website, Petakov Media. It's PETAKOV media.com. That's got links to all my social media and all the other kind of stuff too. But I also have links on my film and video page, which has links to all the series and things that I've mentioned over the course of tonight. So yeah, that's kind of the best place to find me and my work. And, if I could just end on the note saying, people keep an open mind. We really don't have the answers. We don't know the truth. There's a lot of strange things out there, and I hope we'll get to the bottom of it. If not, then I'm just enjoying the journey as it goes along, and getting to experience some of these beautiful locations, and hopefully other people will be inspired to do the same.
Awesome. All right, Aleks, thank you so much for being on ParaTruth Reborn.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
All right, folks, we got a lot of great stuff coming up for you, so tune in every week. Until next week, where you'll find us same time, same channel. My name is Justin.
And I'm Eric. Peace.